The whole world has changed. I feel like we're at a historic moment for the Jewish people. This is one of the major dividers within the Jewish world today. Those who have never really known Jewish vulnerability and those who like know it and feel it deep in their kishkis. And I think that divide has been kind of blown up right now. We've known through the statistics that anti-Semitism has been on the rise for, the last many years. And I think Pittsburgh, let's not forget that Tree of Life really changed in some ways the American Jewish condition. And it kind of woke us up to the fact that it can happen here. First of all, the Pittsburgh shooter was kind of from the classically right-wing anti-Semitism that, as Barry Weiss says, walks into a bar and punches you in the face. That is a form of anti-Semitism with which we are familiar. I think we've known that there was anti-Semitism from the far left, though that has been in many ways part of a bigger culture war in this country. And I think many of us saw it as nefarious and problematic, but not quite as dangerous or as scary. And I think the outpouring of Israel hatred, which again, we knew was there, the alignment with Hamas, the justification of violence, and the complete and total disregard for Jewish lives that we're seeing from the progressive left is shocking. I think the number of stories you hear from young people about their friends reposting videos from Hamas or holding signs with hang gliders, or now this may be total and complete ignorance. There's a lot to unpack about why it's happening, but it's flat out scary. The other thing I'll add is that many Jews right now whose Judaism may have been part of their identities, or maybe a slightly more passive part of their identities in their workplace, are suddenly feeling awakened to their Jewishness, are feeling vulnerable, and they are not feeling supported, seen, protected. At best, they're hearing silence from their colleagues and friends, and at worst, they're hearing piling on to the Israel hatred again and to the disregard for Jewish lives. And I think a lot of people are feeling a sense like the rug's been pulled out from under us, the ground under us is shaking, and fundamentally American Jews are asking, are we as home in this country as we thought? We're grappling with the question of what does it mean to keep American Jews safe right now, literally physically safe, but also emotionally safe. And what does it mean to demand of American society that Jews be protected as we always have felt we've been in this country is another question. We're grappling with questions about who our allies are and who's going to stand with us as all sorts of boundaries and relationships shift right now. I think we're grappling with questions about how we've educated our children and about kind of Jewish identity and Jewish peoplehood. Right now, I think we're seeing a surge for many in our community of identification with the Jewish people and with Israel, but that's also coming along with a realization that Jewish identity and Jewish education has been awfully thin. My son gave a talk in a synagogue here about the college campus, and then he published a piece in Tablet about it. And one of his messages was, if my Israeli friends can be in Gaza, we young American Jews better be able to stay on the college campus. But in order for us to do that, grown-ups, you need to give us a better education. You need to empower us more. How do you expect us to stand up in the face of this and to stay in this discomfort when we don't know enough and when we don't have a strong enough sense of our story, of who we are? So it was a bit of a strong challenge to American Jewish community about the fact that we don't know enough. This is a challenge to Jewish cultural literacy. It's a challenge to Israel education. And there's an opportunity too for educators. There's an awareness now that boy, do I need to understand this. I am on the phone all day with non-Jewish leaders of universities, of independent schools who are help me make sense of this. but also getting invited to parlor meetings, living room conversations within the Jewish community, that the fundamental question people are asking is, how do I make sense of this? And I think that's a question that is both a historical question. How do I understand the history of anti-Semitism, the history of Israel? It's a question both about what's manifesting today in terms of anti-Zionism, sympathy for terror, but it's also, I think, a fundamental question about our right to live in Israel, about, where the idea of Jewish national self-determination came from. And on a deeper level, questions about Jewish power, Jewish dignity, Jewish vulnerability. Like, these are deep questions that I think we now are realizing we have to engage with and teach, especially our next generation about. So that's another, I would say, question that we're wrestling with. This is a moment we're wrestling with questions about safety and security, but there's also questions about the day after. And there's fundamental questions about democracy in both of our two countries. And what is it going to look like for us to rebuild classically liberal democracy in the face of profound, and we now know, dangerous illiberal forces? That is a question I think we're asking ourselves here, because you can't wrestle with anti-Semitism without thinking about that. I think it's obviously a question in Israel too, in a slightly different way. Number one is, I think this is a moment to double down on achdut and arevut, and that when your people are in trauma, we need to give our kids what I would call like an emotional education around what it means to identify with your people and your extended family when they're in the midst of trauma. Unfortunately, the number one force, I think, throughout Jewish history that has instilled in us that sense of achdut has usually been the people who've tried to kill us. And so this is a moment where we are seeing again a pattern that we need to name, we need to help kids understand and make sense of. And I think that achdut is not, it's not a guilt-driven achdut, it's actually one of the keys to our resilience, right? We have one another, we're in it together. Like, that's not a kind of like platitude. That's actually what I would want educators to help kids understand, is that has been key to Jewish surviving and thriving for a couple thousand years. Part of what I want educators to teach children is about the history of Jewish resilience. And that has always meant, number one, seeing our own vulnerability with eyes wide open and not being naive about the threats from without. But it's also meant being strong and resilient in the face of those threats and never being only a victim. And the tools that we have in our history and in our culture and in our tradition to do that include a profound sense of sticking together, a willingness to find unity even in the face of our diversity, a commitment to learning and education, and kind of proudly sustaining our tradition and our culture even in particularly hard times. A commitment to staying engaged with the world around us. Like, I want us to be teaching children the tools of Jewish resistance and resilience right now. If we're going to diagnose what's going on today, we cannot ignore, obviously, social media and the power of disinformation. I read an article years ago that used a term, I've not seen it since, but I loved it. It was called epistemological terror. Epistemological terrorism. And it was the assault on our ability to trust anything that we know. And I've talked to like young progressive Zionists, and they're honestly asking that question: who do I trust? How do I know I can trust the Israeli government right now? How do I know I can trust the IDF any more than I can trust other things? So I think that we're in a profound moment of like epistemological crisis. And I think we're also in a profound moment of moral crisis, where there's an assault on our fundamental ability to find any sense of moral clarity. The flip side of that is, how do you help people navigate nuance and complexity in a world of growing ideological extremes? And I think right now we need an educational and moral revolution around helping people navigate both intellectually and morally what is clear and what is nuanced and complex. This is the thing I am seeing everywhere I go, is the inability to distinguish between those two things. What I would want educators to help children do is to help them see there are things that we hold to be self-evident. There are like anima amis. There are things that when we look at the world, we say that is actually clear. And there's also at the same time a whole range of things about which reasonable people can and should disagree. And the language I've been using when I talk to people is reasonable people can disagree about this, this, and this, but this is actually clear. This explains everything from the president's testimonies to, the frustration that people have in their public schools, to our inability for our friends to simply stand with us. People are getting lost and need tools to find their way back to, I think, those two things. There's three things that I see that give me some hope, maybe actually four. Number one is I do think we are seeing a new version of Jewish unity right now. I believe it's fragile. I think that there's deep disunity underneath it, but at the same time, it's there. And so I think there is an opportunity to think now about how we build on the sense of unity. Again, achdut, arevut, pick your words, and then build on it and to strengthen that unity going forward. I think if we do that in a way that acknowledges the deep disunity inside of it, if we can kind of create a unity that can hold that disunity, we have the potential to expand the boundaries of the Jewish people and of Jewish unity going forward. If we do the opposite, if we're naive about this moment of unity, I fear we will go right back into disunity. So, but the Jewish unity in this moment is a bright light and an opportunity. That's number one. Number two is the awakening of Jewish identity and within individuals. I mean, like there are kids on the college campuses who are taking out their Jewish stars right now. Not only kids who are like running scared from Palestinian rallies. There are kids who are showing up at Hillel that have never been to Hillel before. There is a sense of identification that I think is a bright spot and an opportunity. Related to that, I think is curiosity, is a sense of starting to realize just how much we don't know and a desire to learn and understand. That to me is also both a bright spot and an opportunity. And then lastly, I think within this country, mental models are breaking, and underlying deep issues, again, that may have been like the province of like a small group of people that have been relegated to the space of what I would call kind of culture wars, are starting to come into the light in a way that I think is prompting potentially the beginnings of reckoning with some of the very deep brokenness in our society. Higher education is the best example of that. This is not new, but if this reckoning leads to a fundamental rethinking of some of the broken systems, cultures, assumptions, that's an opportunity. My prayer every day is that this is a generative shvirata kelim. That the brokenness will actually lead to a reshifting, a rethinking, a reshaping that will actually move us forward from some of the things that were honestly true before October 7th, and that maybe we conveniently weren't willing to face at that time.